The Chinook came in low, heavy with pallets and men, dragging a skirt of red dust across the valley floor. From the air, Firebase Echo looked like a scraped coin in the jungle. Dirt berms, Hesco barriers, a ring of concertina wire, and a handful of plywood huts clustered around a steel mast with a blinking aviation light. Beyond the perimeter, the green rose up like a wall. Trees pressed shoulder to shoulder, the canopy stitched so tight the shadows underneath looked poured. Staff Sergeant Jack Rourke had done 2 tours already and learned not to romanticize dirt. Dirt is where you sleep. Dirt is what stops bullets until it doesn't. He sat on the ramp with his ruck between his boots, one hand hooked through the cargo net, the other wrapped around the webbing of Specialist Miguel Alvarez's vest. Alvarez was new to country, 22, a California kid with a shy grin and a habit of talking too fast when he was nervous. Right now he wasn't talking at all. He stared at the shrinking river as if it were a road he should have taken. "Breathe through your nose," Rourke told him over the engine roar. "Chopper air will hollow you out if you let it." Alvarez nodded like the words were a rope and he was grabbing on. Beside them, Lieutenant Tom Hayes checked his mapboard for the 4th time. Hayes was the kind of officer who kept his pen clipped perfectly straight, and his boots shined on principle. He wasn't green exactly, but he still believed plans had rights. He caught Rourke looking and held up the board like a talisman. "We're on the southern finger of the Annamite," he shouted. "Grid here to here, OP Fox up on the ridgeline, convoy route 8 clicks west." Rourke tapped the plastic sleeve over the map, then pointed his chin at the jungle. "Tell that to the terrain, sir." Hayes grinned despite himself. "Fair." The crew chief smacked the ramp twice and gave them the flat hand wave. Time. The Chinook flared, the world tilted, and heat hit them like an opening oven door as the skids kissed the LZ. Rourke stood, slung his ruck, and led the stick down the ramp and into the noise. For a second, everything was a hurricane, rotor wash, dust, shouted names. Then the bird lifted, the thunder moved away, and Echo's sounds resumed. The grind of a generator, a hammer ringing off a steel stake, someone laughing too loud at a joke the wind carried off. "Welcome to Echo," said a sergeant with a pencil behind his ear and mortar dust ground into his sleeves. "I'm Sergeant First Class Klein. Your Charlie team? Good. We've got you in B huts 3 and 4. DFAC is the tent with the crooked flag. Latrines are a gift from hell. If you use the burn barrel, you stir. You don't just stare at it." "Questions?" Alvarez tried. "How long have you?" Klein cut him off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Long enough to know you asked the wrong question. Let's move." They walked the perimeter first, because that's what you do. You learn the angles before you lay your head down. The berm was packed earth chest high, the wire stacked in coils like a sleeping steel snake. Claymore signs faced outward, little white tongues on stakes. Past Tower 2, the land fell away into a ravine choked with bamboo and elephant grass. It looked close enough to touch. It looked like it could swallow a battalion. "Fields of fire are tight," Rourke said to Hayes. "If they get into the folds, we won't see them till they're at the wire." "We've got sensors," Hayes countered, "acoustic and seismic. If they move, we'll know." "Sir," Rourke said gently, "the jungle's always moving." They stopped at the mortar pit. A 120mm sat leveled and sandbagged, its tube blacked with the memory of 1,000 rounds. A chalkboard nearby listed pre-sighted targets by name: Red Lantern, River Mouth, Dogleg, Cathedral, coordinates scrawled in greasy loops. The crew chief, a skinny kid with a buzz cut and a tribal tattoo that looked like a rash, nodded to them and kept swabbing the breech. "We can get steel on the north finger in 90 seconds, he said to nobody in particular. 60 if you bribe us." "Bribe you with what?" Alvarez asked, genuinely curious. "Coffee," the kid said, "or stories." They passed the aid station, a GP medium tent with a Red Cross spray painted on canvas. Inside, Doc Mason looked up from inventory and clocked them in a second. The lieutenant with his clean mapboard, the senior NCO with eyes like a level, the private trying to make himself both tall and small. "You bleed, you come see me," Mason said. "You don't bleed, you still come see me. And if you get bit by anything with more legs than you, bring the body. I keep score." They laughed, because he wanted them to, and because laughing was a little rebellion against the heat. The bee huts were plywood rectangles on cinder blocks with tin roofs that pinged when the sun leaned on them. 8 bunks to a room, a narrow aisle down the middle, a sagging string of Christmas lights someone had forgotten to take down 3 years in a row, names carved into bed frames, a deck of cards soft as cloth, a pin-up tacked to a wall with corners. The helicopter's rotors screamed above the tree line, beating the humid Vietnamese air into a furious storm. The soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder on the hard metal benches, helmets tilted down, rifles cradled across their laps. Nobody spoke. The noise was deafening, but it wasn't just the machine drowning out their voices, it was the weight of where they were going. Private Jack Turner, barely 19, tried to steady his breathing. This was his first deployment outside the States, his first taste of the war that had swallowed so many before him. The smell of fuel and sweat clung to his fatigues, and his hands gripped the stock of his M16 as though it were the only thing keeping him anchored. Across from him sat Corporal Davis, older, battle-worn, his eyes half shut as if he could sleep through anything, even a helicopter shuddering through enemy airspace. Beside him, Sergeant McBride scanned the tree line through the open door, his jaw clenched tight, his hand resting near the trigger of his M60. The pilot's voice crackled over the headset. Firebase Echo in sight. 10 minutes out. Keep your heads down. We've had reports of enemy fire in the area. Jack swallowed hard, looking at the men around him. Each one was lost in his own world, some fiddling with photos from home, others staring at the floor, lips moving silently in prayer. As the helicopter descended, the jungle revealed itself in jagged fragments. The canopy was a sea of green, thick and endless, stretching as far as the eye could see. Here and there, columns of smoke curled upward, marking villages burned in firefights or artillery strikes. Jack had seen maps, briefings, endless chalkboard diagrams back at base camp, but nothing compared to the reality of this place, the shadows, the smell, the sense that the jungle itself was alive and watching. The chopper dipped lower, the soldiers braced, and Jack caught his first glimpse of Firebase Echo, a ragged ring of sandbags and concertina wire carved out of a hilltop. Antennas reached into the air like skeletal fingers. Men in sweat-soaked uniforms waved them in, their faces grey from dust and fatigue. "Home sweet home," Davis muttered, shaking his head. The skids hit the dirt with a jolt, and the ramp dropped. Heat and noise poured inside. "Move, move," McBride barked, and the men spilled out, boots sinking into the red mud. They crouched low, rifles ready as the helicopter lifted away, leaving them in a whirlwind of dust and debris. The air was different once the bird was gone, still heavy, still humid, but now disturbingly quiet. Jack could hear insects buzzing, the faint clang of a hammer on metal, and the distant crack of small arms fire echoing somewhere in the jungle. A lieutenant with tired eyes and a map tucked under his arm approached. "Welcome to Echo. Get your gear squared away and dig in. You won't be leaving this hill for a while." Jack glanced back toward the jungle, the tree line a dark wall on all sides. He felt it again, that strange sensation, as if unseen eyes were fixed on him. He pulled the photograph of his high school sweetheart Emily from his breast pocket and looked at it one more time before tucking it back against his chest. "All right, kid," McBride said, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is it. This hill's ours. We hold it no matter what." Jack nodded, even as unease twisted in his stomach. He had no idea that within weeks, Firebase Echo would become less a stronghold and more a tomb. The first night at Firebase Echo taught Jack that silence could be more terrifying than gunfire. The jungle seemed to breathe, shifting in waves that the eye couldn't follow. The men were exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. The camp smelled of damp wood, kerosene, and something metallic that reminded Jack of the auto shop back home. Jack lay on his cot, boots still on. He'd learned from McBride that you never slept fully stripped down out here. Just as his eyes began to close, a sharp voice cut through the dark. Movement on the south perimeter. The entire hut snapped awake. Boots hit the floor, rifles were grabbed, and within seconds the men were at the sandbags. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs as he dropped into the trench beside Alvarez. The younger soldier's hands trembled as he snapped a magazine into place. Through the night vision goggles, the jungle was a green ocean. The sensors had tripped, signaling vibrations on the perimeter. The men scanned, waiting for the telltale glimmer of muzzle flash or the flicker of movement. Nothing. Only the endless shifting of leaves. Then, something. A figure? No, It was too quick, too smooth. It darted between the trees, vanishing as though the jungle itself had swallowed it. "Contact?" Hayes whispered. Nobody answered. Minutes stretched into an hour. No attack came, no rifle cracked, just the bugs, the frogs, and the rustle of leaves that sounded too deliberate to be wind. Eventually the order came down. Stand down, but stay sharp. Back in the hut, Alvarez sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the dirt floor. "You saw it right?" he asked Jack. "Saw what?" Jack replied, though he knew. "That shape, out there." Jack said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The next day, patrols were sent out. 2 squads vanished into the tree line, swallowed whole by the green. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. The radio crackled, then fell silent. By nightfall, neither squad had returned. The men at Echo ate their rations in silence, chewing dry crackers and cold beans. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. The jungle had taken them. The encirclement. The third day at Firebase Echo began with a sky the color of ash. A thin layer of frost clung to the sandbags, glittering under the weak light. Jack's breath fogged in front of him as he climbed to the observation tower for his shift. The jungle lay silent, heavy, as if it too was holding its breath. He swept the tree line with his binoculars. At first nothing, then he noticed it, a line of broken branches where the patrol had disappeared. The path seemed darker now, as if the vegetation had closed in behind them, swallowing the trail whole. No voices, no movement, just emptiness. Down in the compound, Sergeant McBride barked orders, his voice cutting across the yard like a whip. He wanted foxholes deeper, ammo stacked higher, fields of fire cleared until there was nothing left but red dirt and wire. "Sir," McBride said to Lieutenant Hayes, "we're being watched. I can feel it. I don't like being blind out here." Hayes adjusted his helmet and tried to sound steady. "Command says hold position. Reinforcements are on the way." McBride gave a humorless laugh. "Reinforcements? Sure, I'll hold my breath." By mid-afternoon, the men were on edge. The jungle, once just a wall of green, seemed alive. The leaves shivered without wind. Dark shapes flickered at the corners of their vision, never long enough to draw a bead on, never clear enough to confirm. Private Johnson, the radio operator, kept fidgeting with the handset. "I swear I had them for a second," he said. "Static, then nothing, like they just dropped." "Radios crap out all the time," Hayes muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. That night, the silence returned, thicker, heavier, punctuated by faint rustles. The searchlights cut through the mist, but the beams seemed to be swallowed before they reached the tree line. Jack felt the unease in his chest again, like the jungle was pressing down on him. He clutched Emily's letter in his pocket, the paper already soft from his sweat. "Think they'll come back?" Alvarez whispered. Jack didn't answer, because deep down he already knew. Firebase Echo was no longer just a post on the map. It was a cage, and the jungle was closing in. Night raid. The fourth night at Firebase Echo began with a strange tension in the air. The sun bled out behind the mountains, leaving only a smear of dying orange against an ocean of shadow. The temperature dropped fast, the kind of bone-deep chill that made every man pull his jacket tighter. Jack sat in his foxhole, listening. The jungle was alive now, too alive. Cicadas screamed, frogs croaked, and somewhere in the distance, something wailed like metal tearing. The sound rose and fell, not quite human, not quite animal. It left a sour taste in his mouth. Corporal Davis muttered, "That ain't Charlie. I've been here long enough to know the difference." McBride didn't answer. He just checked the belt on his M60 again, eyes locked on the tree line. Then it came. A flare shot up, painting the world in harsh white light. Shadows scattered across the treetops. Figures moved, dark, fast, too many to count. Contact, east side. Move, move, move. The platoon scrambled into position. Bullets sparked against the steel plates. Mortars thudded, the blasts throwing chunks of dirt into the air. Jack fired into the trees. Each burst of his rifle met with silence. No screams, no cries of pain, no bodies dropping. Just the sound of rounds vanishing into the dark. Alvarez's breathing was ragged beside him. "I don't see them anymore," he whispered. His rifle barrel wavered. Then, as quickly as it began, the night went still. No retreating footsteps, no moans of the wounded. The fog crept back in, curling through the wire like pale fingers. "Where the hell did they go?" Hayes asked, voice tight. McBride didn't lower his weapon.
His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white. "They didn't go anywhere," he said flatly. "They're still out there, watching." Jack felt it too, the eyes in the mist, the silence that wasn't silence. And as the flare's light finally fizzled out above them, Firebase Echo was swallowed whole by the darkness once again. Run on in low ammo. The days bled into nights, and the nights bled into something worse. By the end of the first week under siege, Firebase Echo was no longer a fortress. It was a scar in the jungle, a wound that refused to heal. The supply choppers that were promised never came. The sky above the valley stayed strangely empty. No rotor thump, no resupply drop. Radios hissed and crackled, but every transmission dissolved into static, like someone was deliberately jamming them. The men counted their bullets like gold. Every magazine was rationed. Every grenade was held back for the moment they knew was coming. Meals turned into half cans of cold beans split between two men. Water was rationed to sips, the kind that left the mouth dry and the tongue thick with thirst. One morning Private O'Connor returned from a short patrol with a torn sleeve and wide eyes. "There's movement out there," he said, his voice trembling. "Not just people, big shapes, too many legs." "Knock it off," Hayes snapped. "We're low on ammo. Last thing we need is ghost stories." But O'Connor's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He laid his rifle on the table in the mess hut, and everyone noticed. He only had 5 rounds left. McBride slammed a crate shut, frustration boiling over. "We can't hold this place with half-empty mags. We're sitting ducks, and command's leaving us to rot." Jack kept quiet, chewing slowly on a piece of hardtack. His stomach twisted at every bite, not from hunger but from dread. He had been writing to Emily in scraps now on the back of maps, on cigarette wrappers, on anything he could find. His last letter ended mid-sentence. The pencil had snapped, and he hadn't had the strength to sharpen it. That night, when the fog rolled in again, the men were ready. They crouched in silence, rifles steady, every eye fixed on the jungle. But the enemy didn't come in a wave this time. They came in whispers. A rustle here, a snap of a twig there, a shadow darting just beyond the reach of the searchlight. Then one shot, sharp and lonely from the western ridge. A scream, silence. The men fired bursts into the darkness, but the jungle only swallowed their bullets whole. When morning came, they found no bodies, no blood trails, just more empty casings on the ground, and one less man answering roll call. Jack sat on the berm, staring at the jungle, his letter to Emily burned in his pocket. He whispered the words he hadn't finished writing. "If I fall here, don't remember me as a soldier. Remember me as the boy who couldn't stop staring at you across the diner. The boy who thought your smile could light up the darkest night." His throat tightened, because the nights here were darker than anything he had ever imagined, and they were running out of bullets to keep the dark away. Brothers in arms. By the second week at Firebase Echo, survival wasn't about winning anymore. It was about holding on. Every man knew the math. Fewer bullets, less food, no word from command. Still they stayed. Not because of orders, not really, but because leaving felt worse than staying. Abandoning the post meant admitting defeat, and defeat was a poison they weren't ready to drink. Sergeant McBride had become the backbone of the platoon. He moved like a machine, organizing shifts, checking ammo counts, forcing discipline into men who were starting to fray. His voice was hoarse from barking orders, but when he spoke, even the most broken soldier straightened his back. Jack admired him, though he could see the cracks. At night, McBride's eyes lingered too long on the mist, as if he expected it to part and reveal something only he could see. Sometimes, Jack heard him muttering prayers under his breath, the kind that sounded more like bargains. Alvarez, on the other hand, was unraveling. He clutched his rosary until his knuckles bled, whispering in Spanish. He refused to sleep without someone else sitting watch beside him. Once Jack woke to find him standing in the doorway of the hut, staring out into the fog. "What are you doing?" Jack whispered. "They're calling my name," Alvarez said without turning. "I heard it, clear as day. My mother's voice." Jack grabbed his shoulder, spun him around and forced him back into his bunk. "Nobody's calling you, man. It's just your head messing with you." But when Jack closed his eyes again, he thought he heard it too. Emily's voice, sweet and soft, drifting from the jungle. That same day, Corporal Davis pulled Jack aside. His usually steady eyes were tight, shadows sinking deep beneath them. "Kid," Davis muttered, "I need to tell you something. Last night, when the fog rolled in, I saw them." "The VC?" Jack asked. Davis shook his head slowly. "Not VC, not even men, just shapes, like shadows, but thicker, moving between the trees, watching." Jack didn't know what to say. If he admitted he'd seen the same, it would make it real. If he denied it, it would leave Davis alone with the thought. He chose silence, staring at the ground. Davis sighed. Yeah, thought so. You saw it too. That evening, the men gathered around a small fire against orders. Hayes tried to stop them at first, but even he seemed to realize it was pointless. The fire was the only thing that made them feel human anymore. They passed around a dented canteen of whiskey someone had smuggled in months ago. The liquid burned, but it warmed their insides, loosened their tongues. Stories began to spill out. Stories of home, of girls left behind, of small-town streets that felt like dreams now. Moran shuffled his cards and dealt them into the firelight. Play a hand, he told Jack. Even if you lose, it'll keep your head in the here and now. Jack took the cards, the edges soft and greasy. He looked around the circle at these men, exhausted, hollow, some trembling, some laughing too hard, and realized something. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were brothers bound by fear, by hunger, by silence. Brothers who might not live to see another dawn. And in that moment, the jungle whispered again.
By the 12th night, the men at Firebase Echo had stopped counting the hours. Time had become a blur of sweat, smoke and fear. The enemy hadn't stormed the wire since the raid, but the jungle pressed closer every night, as if alive, as if plotting. The men clung to one last hope, air support. They were told resupply birds and close air cover would come once the weather cleared. Every morning, Jack climbed the observation tower, scanning the grey skies, waiting for the low thunder of engines. But the only sound was the endless wind rolling down the valley. Then one morning the clouds broke. For the first time in days, sunlight cut across the ridgeline. The men cheered. Private Alvarez fell to his knees in prayer, whispering gratitude to God. Even McBride allowed himself a thin smile. About damn time, he said, slinging his M60. They'll see the flare, they'll send the birds, we're going home. By noon, Lieutenant Hayes had Johnson on the radio, sending coordinates and desperate pleas. This is Echo, do you copy? We are low on ammunition, we are requesting immediate air resupply, over, static. Then a voice broke through, garbled but clear enough. Echo, this is command, negative resupply. Weather window too narrow, hold your position. Reinforcements are en route. Over. The cheer that had lifted the camp collapsed into silence. Bullshit, McBride growled. Weather's clear as a Sunday morning. They're not sending anyone. We're on our own. Hayes bristled. That's not your call to make. But the doubt was in his eyes. That night, with no promised resupply, the men sat around the dim fire again. The whiskey was gone. The rations were down to scraps. The ammunition count was grim. 2 magazines per rifle, half a belt for McBride's M60. Jack fingered Emily's letter in his pocket. He wanted to finish it, but every time he lifted the pencil, he felt a weight pressing down on his chest. What could he write that mattered now? Alvarez leaned in, his eyes wide and bloodshot. They don't want us out of here, he whispered. That's the truth. Command's not coming. They've already decided. We're expendable. Shut up, kid, Davis muttered. But no one argued. The fog rolled in thicker than ever, swallowing the perimeter in a matter of minutes. The searchlights barely cut through the grey, and the jungle beyond seemed to dissolve into a shapeless wall. Jack listened, waiting for the gunfire, for the shadows, for the sound of something moving out there. But what came was worse. Silence. A silence so deep it felt like the world had ended, and only they remained. He gripped his rifle tighter. The words from Emily's last letter echoed in his skull. Come home safe. Promise me. Jack closed his eyes. He didn't know if he could keep that promise anymore. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for more intense war stories from the shadows of history. Last stand at the wire. The night of the attack came without warning. No sensors tripped. No flares were launched. One moment the fog was rolling in as it always did, swallowing the perimeter in a wall of grey. The next, the jungle exploded. Gunfire cracked from the tree line. Tracers tore through the mist like red-hot needles. Mortars thumped into the earth, showering the huts with dirt and fire. Men scrambled from their bunks, grabbing rifles, pulling on helmets, shouting over the chaos. Sergeant McBride was already at the wire, the M60 roaring from its sandbag nest. Get on the line, he bellowed. Light it up. Jack dove into the trench, heart pounding in his throat. He fired into the fog, muzzle flash lighting his face in brief bursts. Shapes surged forward, too many, too fast. Were they men? They looked like silhouettes, twisted, jerking, but silent. Not a single cry, not a single shout, just the thud of boots in mud and the hiss of the jungle closing around them. Private Alvarez fumbled with his rifle, whispering prayers through clenched teeth. "Saint Michael, defend us in battle, deliver us from evil." His hands were shaking so badly that Jack reached over, steadying the weapon for him. "Breathe, Miguel, just breathe. Aim center mass." Alvarez nodded, pulled the trigger, and the rifle barked. For a moment, Jack thought he saw one of the shapes stagger backward into the mist, but when the smoke cleared, there was nothing. The mortar crew tried to fire, but the tube gave only a hollow thud, a dud round sinking uselessly into the mud. One of the privates scrambled after it, shouting something, and then there was a flash too bright, too fast, and he was gone. The enemy pressed harder. The wire rattled with unseen hands. The men threw grenades into the fog, the blasts lighting up faces that melted back into darkness before anyone could confirm what they'd seen. Lieutenant Hayes ran down the line, shouting orders that no one seemed to hear. His voice cracked with panic. "Hold the line, hold it, reinforcements are coming." McBride grabbed his arm, yanking him down into the trench. "Open your eyes, Lieutenant. Reinforcements aren't coming. We're it. We are the line." Hayes's face went pale, but he nodded. He raised his rifle and fired into the grey. Hours passed in a blur of smoke and fire. Men fell. The ammo piles dwindled to nothing. By dawn the attacks had stopped, but the ground was littered with shell craters, burnt-out crates, and the twisted remains of their own equipment. But still no bodies. Jack leaned against the sandbags, his ears ringing, his hands trembling from the weight of the rifle. Around him, the survivors looked like ghosts, faces grey with exhaustion, eyes hollowed out by what they'd seen. "Sergeant," Jack began, but the words died in his throat. McBride sat slumped against the berm, the M60 across his lap. His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at anything. His lips moved silently, mouthing words only he could hear. The jungle once again was quiet, too quiet, and Jack realized this wasn't a siege. It was a slow, deliberate burial. The jungle wasn't attacking them to win. It was waiting for them to give in. Silence before dawn. The night stretched like a wound across the sky. The fire in the mortar pit had gone cold, leaving only blackened metal and the faint smell of burnt earth. The men of Firebase Echo sat in silence, staring at nothing. Their ammo was nearly gone, their rations reduced to crumbs, their hope stripped down to a thread. Jack sat in the trench with Alvarez beside him, both wrapped in torn ponchos. The younger man's lips moved in silent prayer, but no sound came. Even his whispers seemed swallowed by the thick wall of fog that pressed against the wire. For hours, the men listened. No gunfire, no birds, not even the usual insect chorus. The jungle was still, unnaturally still, as though the world itself had paused. It was the silence that gnawed at them, silence heavier than artillery, silence that carried weight, pressing on their lungs until every breath felt stolen. Just before dawn, Corporal Davis climbed into the trench, his face pale and streaked with dirt. He lowered himself beside Jack, clutching his rifle like it was the last thing tethering him to reality. "They're not attacking anymore," Davis said quietly. "They're just waiting, letting us rot in here. We're not soldiers to them, we're prey." Jack stared at him, throat tight. "Prey for what?" Davis shook his head. His eyes twitched toward the fog, where faint shapes shifted in silence. "For whatever lives out there." As the first sliver of pale light broke across the horizon, the men stood at the wire, eyes stinging from smoke and sleeplessness. The fog thinned, but it didn't lift. It lingered, curling low and heavy around the sandbags, as though reluctant to let go of them. Then the sound came. Not a gunshot, not artillery, a single hollow thump, echoing from the jungle. Then another, slow, rhythmic, like footsteps. McBride stood, gripping the M60 with trembling hands. "Positions," he growled, though his voice was no longer steady. The footsteps grew louder, closer, but still hidden in the fog. The men raised their rifles, fingers tightened on triggers, hearts pounded against ribs, and then silence, total, suffocating silence. The sun crept higher, but the fog didn't burn away. It only thickened, glowing faintly in the half-light. The men stared, waiting for what would step through. Jack slid his hand into his pocket and felt Emily's letter. His throat ached, his eyes stung, but he didn't look away from the mist, because he knew Whatever was coming, dawn wouldn't save them. The price of Echo. The fog never lifted. Even when the sun climbed high, the hill remained trapped inside a pale shroud. The men of Firebase Echo stood at the wire, rifles raised, eyes burning red from sleepless nights. The footsteps in the mist had stopped hours ago, but the silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of silence that made every man feel like he was already dead. Lieutenant Hayes tried to hold the line of command together, but his voice was cracked, almost pleading now. "Stay sharp. Reinforcements are coming. They have to be." But no one believed him anymore. The radio had been silent for days. The last message, "Hold position," echoed in their minds like a cruel joke. Sergeant McBride, once the pillar of discipline, looked like a shadow of himself. His helmet hung low, his uniform soaked in sweat and blood, his hands gripping the M60 with a desperation that betrayed his calm exterior. "This is it," he muttered. "They're not sending anyone. We're the line. We're the last ones." Jack looked at him, and for the first time McBride seemed smaller, not weak, just human, just tired. As night fell, the fog grew thicker, swallowing the camp completely. Searchlights flickered and died one by one, leaving only the dull glow of burning embers from their last scraps of firewood. Then the jungle stirred. The air shifted. Shadows began to press against the wire, silent and endless. No shouts, no battle cries, just the weight of presence, heavier than any artillery shell. "Open fire," McBride roared, and the line lit up with muzzle flashes. Bullets tore into the mist, tracers vanishing into grey. The M60 screamed until the belt clicked dry. Grenades burst with hollow thunder, and yet the fog remained. The shapes moved closer, silent, patient, unstoppable. Alvarez fired wildly until his last round clicked empty. He dropped the rifle, fumbling for his rosary, tears streaking down his dirt-caked face. "They're here," he whispered. "They've come for us." Davis dragged him down, shoving a knife into his hands. "Then we go out fighting." Jack pressed Emily's letter against his chest, his pencil still stuck through the paper, the words unfinished. He wanted to write more, wanted to tell her he loved her, that he'd tried, that he hadn't been afraid. But there was no time. The wire collapsed, the fog surged in, shadows poured through like a tide. The last thing Jack heard before the world went dark was McBride's voice, hoarse and breaking. "Hold the line." The sun rose above the mountains, spilling light across the valley. The jungle stood silent, untouched. The mist lifted slowly, revealing the scar of Firebase Echo. The sandbags were torn, the huts were hollow, the mortar pit lay silent, its tube cracked open like a broken bone. Helmets lay scattered in the mud, half buried, their straps fluttering in the wind. Rifles lay in the dirt, magazines empty. But of the 30 men who had arrived 2 weeks before, not a single body remained. All that was left was silence, and a single letter, half buried in the mud. The words on the torn paper read, "Emily, if I fall here," and then nothing.